Our mission, and we choose to accept it, is zero injuries and zero environmental impact. A healthy workforce and environment is key to our nation's continued success. The Mission Zero podcast is a deep dive with the industry's top experts into the health, safety, and environmental aspects of today's workplace. Our mission is to be a platform for new ideas and strategies that, when implemented, will improve our safety, our environment, and how we govern out business. We are making the world safer, and we're going to have fun doing it.
4 of the Mission Zero podcast. My name is Jeff Peoples, your host. And today I have a very, very special guest, Sarah. How you pronounce your last name?
Stogner.
I wanted to keep calling you Stogner for some odd, real reason.
It's better than Stoner. I've heard worse.
So Sarah, I guess, would be the very definition of a well-rounded human being. She's a lawyer, an entrepreneur, an author, a podcast host, and most famously now running as the Republican candidate for the Texas Railroad Commission. Sarah, I've read a quote that said, well-behaved women rarely make history. I guess you probably take that quote to heart.
I do.
Well, thank you for coming on. There are, just a lot of things. I know your life is probably a whirlwind right now, and you're running around, and I really appreciate you giving the Mission Zero podcast a bit of your time. Can you start us out just a little bit about your history, where you're from, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 37. I'm a civilian Army brat growing up. So I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, grew up in Florida, California. Parents got divorced. My mom moved us back to Alabama, her hometown. So I went to middle school and high school in Huntsville. Then thought I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. Applied to all these really good engineering programs my senior year of high school, realized I did not want to be an engineer, even though I come from a family of them, took calculus and was like, yeah, you guys can have those integrals. That's cool. But had really liked economics. And so got a letter in the mail from LSU inviting me to go for spring testing. And so with my AP credits and spring testing, I was able to graduate undergrad in 3 years, met a boy, stayed for the boy for law school. Got rid of that boy, moved to New Orleans, met another boy, moved out here with him, and moved out here in 2017 to the Permian, and have been an oil and gas lawyer for 14 years. So most of my work has been representing operators, service companies, midstream companies in risk allocation issues, and then litigation when necessary. So for those in the industry, I draft and negotiate master service agreements, things like that. And then really where I cut my teeth and fell in love with the industry was when I was litigating well control insurance issues. Okay. So, when you drill a new well or you've got operations,
Yeah, if you hit that table, it's going to really resonate. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
I really cut my teeth on learning the operational aspects of the E&P business with blowouts. And so, you're drilling a well or you have something happen and you've got well control insurance. Well, at the end of the day, it's all a business decision. And if it's depending on how many zeros there are at the end of that claim, how hard is the insurance company going to fight to pay it? And so I really fell in love with it. I mean, I really love the intellectual challenge of, I guess, the engineering aspects of it. I'm not an engineer, right? But I like learning. And so it was fascinating. I realized society needs oil and gas. It's really vilified. We've done a really poor job as an industry of standing up for ourselves and bragging about all the great things we do of lifting people out of poverty and things like that. But we've got to do it the right way. And we have to be good environmental stewards. And doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And I'm tired of, I would say, more of a leftist agenda claiming to be the environmental folks. Because I'm like, no, us conservatives, we're the ones that like to hunt and fish. And we're actually pretty amazing conservationists. Yeah. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. Well, thank you. A couple of things you said on that one. Yeah, I know the feeling of traveling for a girl or moving across country. I moved from Georgia to Texas for one.
Yeah.
And when I originally came, and your comment about the engineer, I wouldn't say you're not an engineer. I'd say you're just not a degreed engineer. About a year or so ago, I was asked to speak to about 800 high school children about STEM. And they called me up and they was like, "Do you please come speak to STEM?" And I was like, "I am not an engineer." I said, "I'm not." And they're like, "Wait a minute, you design your own products?" I said, "Yeah, you're an engineer." And I went, "Well, yeah, you're right. I'm just, do I have a degree? No. Have I done this for quite a while? Yes, I have." So I wouldn't necessarily say you weren't, but you can be something without a degree, certainly. But so you're running for the Texas Railroad Commissioner position. It's March 1st, right? Is the final date?
It
Early
is.
voting's already started,
Yeah,
though.
early voting started February 14th, and it ends, I believe, on the 25th.
So for those, I would venture to guess that most people in most audiences you speak to are going to fully know what the Railroad Commission does, but they're essentially a regulatory commission, I guess regulating the function of any kind of carbon extraction. Any level of the work being done, they're the regulatory
Yeah,
authority.
I think that's a pretty good definition. What I tell people is they have exclusive jurisdiction to regulate the exploration and production of hydrocarbons through, wellbores. They have exclusive jurisdiction over intrastate pipelines, so all flow lines, natural gas supply lines to houses and buildings, natural gas supply lines to the ultimate power station, right? And then surface mining.
Okay. And surface mining, is that?
Lignite, coal.
Oh, coal. Okay, so that's what you mean by that. Okay. All right. And so I saw a lot of, in reading about you and what people just kept wanting to start with, what's your qualifications? What,
Well, I have boobs. They assume I'm not qualified, right?
I think, I think it's a little bit about your age too. And I think it's insulting to ask you your qualifications. So I'm not going to be asking you your qualifications because I believe you have them. I just don't, I'm more concerned about why are you running? Like, there's something driven you pretty hard, pretty heavy here to run for this position.
Yeah, to move to Austin and take a pay cut?
Yeah, I guess so. I was like, something out there is driving you. And no, I'm not going to insult you by asking you qualifications. I know you're qualified here already. So why are you running and what's gone wrong that made you want to run?
Yeah, sure. Well, even though you're not going to ask me about my qualifications, let me give you a couple for your listeners if they don't know.
Go ahead.
So I am supervisor well control certified. I have spent, I would say, probably hundreds of days in the field in incident response situations, at a blowout, emergency situations, incident command. So I'm NIMS ICS certified. I've got my PEC safety card, my TWIC card, right? I've done all that. H2S certifications. The only thing I haven't done is I haven't done the Hewitt training. I really want to go just for shits and giggles and learn how to get out of a helicopter because I like scuba diving. But one day
I did that.
Yeah. I just haven't had a justification to need to do it and pay for it. But if anybody wants to sponsor me for free Hewitt training, I will come do it. But no, and so really what happened was I moved out onto this ranch last summer. My friend, she's got a 22,000 acre cattle ranch in Ward and Crane counties.
Wow.
And she's 35. Both of her parents have died recently. And she's Naval Academy grad, Harvard MBA, incredibly smart woman. But doesn't have a ton of E&P, upstream oil and gas experience. And she's like, we've got a couple wells and a couple tanks that when I drive by, they stink. And will you just come check it out? And I went out there and I started looking around and I was appalled at crude in cellars, leaking stuffing boxes, tanks with absolutely no vapor recovery, just thief hatches wide open. But I went to a couple of the injection wells because they're all water flood or secondary recovery, right? And around here, the only backside Bradenhead pressure gauges are on injection wells. You don't have to have a pressure gauge on a Bradenhead on an operating well, producing well, anything other than an injection well. But on the injection wells, all the gauges I looked at had pressure on the backside. And I was like, why? We saw one of the pumpers and I said, hey, why do you got pressure on the backside? Oh, yeah, we just did our mechanical integrity tests and it's just some bleed off. Huh? That's like the company man that told me cement shrinks when that it expands when it cures instead of shrinks. And I was like, no, but okay. I'm not going to fight you out here. So I ended up writing a letter to an operator that was going to come in and drill a new well. They were going to drill a new horizontal nearby. And I said, hey, just a heads up. I don't know what's happening, but I think you've got maybe some subsurface communication because you've got, pressure on your braiding heads. And if I'm wrong, whatever, no harm, no foul. And if I'm right, maybe I can save someone from a blowout if they encounter pressure. I just said, look, if you're going to drill new, you might be encountering pressure shallower than you're anticipating. So they haven't drilled still, and now we know why, because I moved out there Memorial Day weekend on June 9th. Or let me back up. June 7th, Chevron safety guy, Pitts, who was assigned the assets last year from Chevron, a couple of their safety guys, engineer, lawyers came out. We toured, and I was like, hey, guys, look at these asphaltines right here. This is nasty. Look at something happened here. I don't know what it was. Just some spots we'd found with a drone, walking, just problematic spots, that you could tell, are distressed. And, oh, yeah, sorry, okay, we'll delineate. We'll make sure to clean it up to regulatory standards. Great, no problem. That was June 7th. June 9th, I get a call from the pumper saying he was at the Estes 24 well, which is a plugged and abandoned well, sent me a video. It was flowing water. And he's like, I'm at an old plugged well, and I don't know what happened, but I've called it into the Railroad Commission, and they're going to come out tomorrow to inspect. So I met him out there the next day with the inspector and a geologist, and they weighed the water. They had a mud scale. They weighed the water, and it was flowing 10-pound brine. And I knew from my well control experience and clients that had spent millions of dollars on calcium chloride to weight up fluid to be able to control the blowout. Holy cow, we're flowing kill weight fluid. Where is this coming from, and why is it here? No hydrocarbons, like no sheen, just brine. And I had
And what is brine?
So brine is just heavy salt water.
Okay.
Yep. So produced water that's just been weighted up with something.
Okay.
And so we've now figured out over the past few months, there is about 700 feet down, you've got a salt formation, which is called the Salado, and it's just a few hundred feet of salt. And what's happening is you've got deeper reservoirs, you have lack of mechanical integrity in the wellbore, and so you've got formation fluids that are migrating up the wellbore and path of least resistance. They've made their way to the Salado, and they eat out that salt formation until the pressure builds, till it can't absorb any more salt. It finds its next pathway, and it flows to surface. And so they came out, and originally they said, oh, we're not going to... This is just every time I tell it, I can't believe it. Chevron guy shows up, and I'm like, great, Chevron's a great company. They're going to step up to the plate. He comes out, he's like, I'll get a backhoe out here in a few days. And then we'll, I was like, no, you're going to get a backhoe out here today and a vac truck. Our freshwater aquifers start at 50 feet. This is in the sandhills, and if you've ever been to the beach and you've tried to build a moat, right, you pour water in, and a little bit of the water stays in the moat, but most of it goes straight through. It's like this amount of salt, you can't get rid of salt. You're going to get out here and you're going to fix this. So fast forward, a week later, the Railroad Commission lawyered up on the landowner and said, you're not coming out until, or don't talk to us. All communications need to come through council. And I thought that the state only lawyered up against you when you were a criminal. But if you're a landowner with an oil and gas problem, the state will lawyer up against you. And now here we are. Landowners spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've drilled 6 monitoring wells. We've proved that we've got radium-226 and 228 in the groundwater. And the Railroad Commission is still refusing to do anything.
Okay, I've got a few clarifying questions about some of the things you just said there. So the well you're talking about, that's what's defined as an orphaned well?
It was not an orphaned well, actually. So this was a well that was plugged. And
so what's the difference between orphaned and plugged?
Yeah, so orphaned is when you have no operator that is viable and legally responsible. So if you've got an operator who loses their P5 under Texas law, their right to operate, those become orphaned wells.
Okay.
And then the state has about $2.3 billion of orphan well liability.
And how many wells is that? What's the number of those?
I don't know, but if you're assuming about $20,000 a well, which is still low, the state pays usually $8,000 to $20,000 per well, which I think that you can't properly P&A a well. You can't wait. If you're waiting 12 hours on cement, there's no way you can get in and out in 24 hours and place and wait and tag and confirm and pressure test 4 different plugs, right? So it's thousands of well bores, probably tens of thousands of well bores. There's at least 10,000 delinquent P5s, which means 10,000 operators have gone out of business and left well bores that the state is now on the hook to plug.
So I heard you mention regulatory standards. We've got someone coming out here for regulatory standards. The Railroad Commission is setting those regulatory standards,
Yes.
right? Who is responsible for inspecting them?
The Railroad Commission.
How many people work for the Railroad Commission to do that?
Hundreds.
100. Okay, so there's a lot of inspectors out there.
I think I'm not positive on this, don't quote me, but I think they average 1 per county.
Okay. Well, in some counties that would be,
Yeah, impossible.
yeah.
Right? Like, good luck in Midland County.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I'm thinking about it. An orphaned well and what was the other one? The
Just a plugged well.
plugged well.
Yeah.
So who is responsible for plugged wells?
So under Texas law, the operator that plugs the well remains liable in perpetuity to ensure that that well remains plugged.
And if that company no longer exists?
It becomes an orphaned well.
Oh, so
If
that's
it becomes unplugged.
okay. Okay. All right. And one thing too, you mentioned blowouts. How often does that happen? I mean, I know the casual person in the U.S. when they think of blowouts, they're only going to think of offshore and the incident that occurred a few years ago in the Gulf, but on land it happens as well.
Yeah. So, according to my well control friends, there's about 1 traditional blowout a week across the globe. Fire, right? Like we see,
Yeah.
like we're used to seeing hydrocarbons, fire, about 1 a week,
Okay.
which is completely unacceptable.
Yeah. And is that in the United States?
No, that's across the world. But I
Okay.
would say here in the Permian, these wells that were happening in Crane County that started, spewing water 150 feet into the air in January, those are happening all the time.
So what would you say? I mean, I guess that was if there's any environmental catastrophe waiting to happen or environmental issues, it seems like that's where most of it's stemming from in the oil industry right now. Is it other issues?
Yeah, I think probably the majority of our environmental issues are from lack of mechanical integrity, for sure. I think we've also got some legacy stuff with old pits that were never properly closed. There's a fair amount of that.
Okay, and you fast forward. You're commissioner. What is your plan? What do you intend to do with this?
Yeah, so my plan is to bring transparency to the agency, right? I think 95% of the regs are sufficient. We've got a couple things that I think we need cement all the way up the backside in every wellbore, new wellbore. We shouldn't be drilling new wells and not cementing to surface and then confirming a good cement job with a cement bond log, especially on these long horizontal wells. If you don't get a good cement job, you have migration, you have flow of hydrocarbons, gas, produced water into shallower zones. What I'm learning now is we have hundreds of thousands of acres of subsurface cross-flow across the Permian. And the reason you go and you hear, if you're listening to AADE, right, the drilling engineer guys, and they're talking about 4 and 5 string casing designs. And the reason they're having to increase from a traditional 3-string to a 4 or 5 string casing design is because they're encountering shallow flow that wasn't there historically. So where is it coming from? It's coming from deeper. It's cross-communicating. And for a long time, people haven't worried about it because it wasn't necessarily impacting the freshwater aquifers that are usually, around here at least 50 to 600 feet. But now we know that the Rustler, which is our deepest freshwater aquifer, that's for a long time been considered a long-term potable source, that you can't drink it traditionally as produced, right? It's about 3,000. It's right at the max for drinking water standards. But with minimal filtration, it would be a great source of potable water. There's
Not expensive to do.
It's very plentiful. It's relatively shallow, and it was always like a good backup for the Permian. And we've got 180,000 parts per million chlorides in the Rustler now because it's been communicating with the San Andreas. And the San Andreas is a deeper formation at about 2,800 feet that has natural oil and gas. It has been a producing zone in areas.
And the San Andreas is what? Is it an aquifer or?
It is, I don't know. It's not a freshwater aquifer.
Okay.
It's not classified as it may be in some parts of the state, so don't quote me on that. But where we are
It's
now,
a water source is what you're saying.
Right. It is a potential freshwater source. But it's salted out now. It's very salty. And it's also an injection zone for produced water. So with all the earthquakes and the reduction in the deep water injection for salt water, they are now back to injecting into the San Andreas, which they had stopped because it had gotten overpressurized and they were having problems with shallow pressure, needing 4 and 5 string casing designs. So now we're back injecting into the San Andreas and we're seeing like this crane blowout, right? Because pressure subsurface, it's a wall. So if you've got hundreds of thousands of acres of pressurized reservoir, it's not you inject here and it travels. It's you inject over here and think of it like as a solid wall, and you'll get a pressure response miles away because it's pressurized throughout. Does this make sense?
Yeah. Is that what's causing the mini earthquakes, or is it something else causing that?
So my understanding of what they think is causing the mini earthquakes is from deep injection below 8,000-10,000 feet. And the quantity, I mean, we've got 15 to 20 million barrels of water a day that we're moving in oil and gas operations. And that's part of it. And then I'm also told that they think part of it may be depleting from the producing zones. Because, historically in our vertical wells, you'd drill at 3,000 feet, you'd produce a barrel of oil, a couple barrels of water, and then you'd re-inject that water into that same zone in a water flood, right? You'd just kind of keep it in the family on location, and it would help keep your formation pressurized, it'd help keep, fluids moving, et cetera. But it also helped you didn't need to dispose of it. Now, the entire reason we have to frack, right, is because it doesn't naturally flow, and you can't re-inject it back in. And so we're taking it out, we're putting it deeper, we're putting it shallower, we're depleting it from this zone. We've got a lot of stuff going on. So I think we need a comprehensive reservoir analysis of exactly what's causing the earthquakes. But that's my general understanding from listening to the experts of what their general consensus is. So
I'm trying to think of a way to I don't know if summarize, but give a macro view of what you're saying. You're saying that there's a lot of integrity, or I guess engineering, structural integrity problems with many of the wells that are out there, including what we're even drilling now, right?
Yep. So
they haven't really, you can somewhat understand, not being perfect 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but now it's almost an unforgivable one to not be able to be structurally building these things for the long term and what's going on at different levels of the earth. And you also somewhat see a threat to our natural water sources.
I believe, as scary as this is, we cannot fix what's happened in the Permian. I think we can manage it.
Okay.
But I think it's beyond repair.
Well,
it's deep.
That that's a little bit distressing, to say the least. So, I mean, I guess that's almost a hair on fire situation right now.
It is, and if we don't control it internally, the feds are going to come in and shut us down.
Why do you think that there's nothing being done? Is it just political, or is it?
It's money. You're talking. This is going to be big tobacco or asbestos. This is the oil and gas energy industry's crisis.
Okay, so
This is probably trillions of dollars.
Okay, so I feel like you're a little bit like Winston Churchill in the early 1930s, sounding the alarm on Germany. So, okay,
It's a good analogy.
Political contributions. You said that it's politics, it's money. You're not taking any political contributions.
I'm not.
That was one of the that was the thing I really liked, because I mean it really does. everybody's got their side and they line up on their side and like, ooh, this group is giving this candidate money. And they're all, for the most part, on both sides of political campaigns, the same people are giving money, or same corporations are giving money to the same candidate on each side. They're giving it to both, right? So there's really no unspoiled person entering these offices typically, but if you're not accepting contributions, I admire that. Tip of the hat to you for that. So a couple of other things, this is, health, safety, and environmental podcast. So, when I originally was speaking with you, I didn't realize it was going to be this environmental. So, but that's what you're here for, to teach, right? You're here to tell everybody this stuff, because the common person, unless they're neck deep in the oil and gas business, they don't really know. And I'm not. I'm a safety and product developer. I'm not an oil and gas guy. So even I, who spend time with these people, these workers, I don't know this stuff. So you had a list of 3 priorities that I wanted to talk to you about as well. One is the grid, which obviously shook us to the core last year. We've already spoken about the earthquakes and the orphan wells. So the grid. Can you give a little bit of I know it came out to some people that the grid was, we had our own power grid in Texas and how that worked and what are the pros and cons of that. Can you just explain the situation that we have in Texas with the power grid, what's wrong, and what do we need to do to fix it?
Yeah, so Texas in true Texas fashion doesn't want to be dependent on the rest of the country. So we have a self-reliant grid, and we sustain our own grid. And I think that there may be, I think my understanding is there's 3 points of integration with the rest of the country where if we really needed to, we could import and export, in and out of the state. But for the most part, we generate all of our electricity within the state of Texas. And so the Railroad Commission has jurisdiction over the intrastate pipelines. They don't have jurisdiction over windmills. They don't have jurisdiction over solar panels. They don't have jurisdiction over substations or transmission lines. But they do have jurisdiction over the natural gas pipelines that get to the power plant to provide electricity. And so what happened in 2021 with that freeze was twofold, in my understanding. One, the first failure was you didn't have critical infrastructure designated, so that when there is a surge of demand on the grid, and it can only handle so much, and if you get to a critical juncture point, my understanding is it basically implodes on itself. And if that had happened, we would have all been out. It would have been like a complete blackout of the state for weeks. It would have been absolutely catastrophic. So in order to prevent that overload and essentially frying of all of the system, they shut down intentionally power to different locations. And there wasn't a good plan ahead of time of where do those priorities go, right? Obviously hospitals, obviously, right, those kinds of things get first priority. But what people didn't think about was saltwater disposal facilities, for example, or natural gas compressor stations, or even, some of our major natural gas fields where you got to make sure that your pumps are running, et cetera, because the natural gas is great, but unlike crude, right, we don't have a ton of storage. It's more on demand.
Yeah.
And so we've got a system that when everything's running works relatively well. Twofold problems. One is we're not used to really cold weather down here, right? I mean, everyone recognizes that this was kind of an unusual event, but guess what? Just like we have to plan for 100-year hurricanes, we have to plan for 100-year freeze events. And so that wasn't done. There was a lack of communication between the various entities within the state, the Electric Commission, right, Public Utilities, ERCOT, all of these different entities that have different says. And then the Railroad Commission, Christy Craddock went and testified she didn't know that she had jurisdiction over intrastate pipelines. That's terrifying. So she's been in there 10 years. So I think the first problem is we don't have mechanical integrity on a lot of our pipelines and facilities. So we can talk about winterization and you're going to pump some glycol into a pipe. Well, if the pipe has holes in it, the glycol is not going to get to where it needs to go. So we need to be intellectually honest about the condition of our infrastructure first and foremost. And we've got a lot of aging pipelines that have not been properly maintained. They are supposed to be natural gas flow lines. They You don't have the proper separators, heater treaters on location so that as a well produces oil, gas, and water, it needs to be separated out before it goes through the lines so that you don't have, for example, heavy sour crude sitting at the bottom of a low pressure flow line just eating through that steel. And then what happens is it sits in the bottom, it eats out, and then it'll get a hole. And because the gas is lighter, it still floats. And it takes a while, and the crude will start leaching out the bottom, and then finally it'll get a pressure differential, and you'll come out, and in the sandhills, it'll look like there's been like a minor burst, and that's how you find them. You'll see like a little crater.
Yeah.
And that's where the natural gas flows.
So let me if I'm hearing you right,
Yeah.
if crude sits in a steel pipe, it can eat through that steel pipe.
So hydrogen sour, like right, all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, H2S sulfites is really corrosive carbonic acid. So in these places where we've got CO2 tertiary recovery, CO2 mixes, it creates carbonic acid. That's corrosive, right? Steel and cement are not forever, right? They're 50 to 100-year solutions when they're properly maintained, but there's no cathodic protection on those little flow lines. And
so who is responsible now? Who has the inspection responsibility for these lines? Is this the Railroad Commission as well? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there, and you may not know, or just ask, like, how are they, is it on a regular basis?
No.
They're not?
No.
It's just they're responsible, but they're not, they don't have an annual check or anything like that, pressure test or anything like that.
I mean, look, they are supposed to visually inspect and maintain their pipelines.
The company.
Yeah. Whoever operates it, but they're not. Why? Because
it's expensive.
Yeah, and the regulators don't enforce the regs. They don't penalize people. You know, it's like if you and I are going to go to the Super Bowl and we can't find a parking spot and we don't have any change, we're going to probably risk a $100 ticket. If you're, like, how important is the event? Where are you going? Maybe I'm willing to pay a $5,000 fine to get to where I need to go if it's right. But
so you're saying they're not painful enough?
No, I think operators are as afraid of the Railroad Commission as you and I are of meter maids. It is a minor inconvenience.
That's a good way to put it. Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, that's interesting.
And so, that was the first part of the question. Okay, so you have to have mechanical integrity. Then, on top of that, you actually need to winterize and prepare for these events. Because if it freezes for more than 2 days, we've got serious issues.
What does winterize it mean in this with the pipelines? What does that mean?
I mean, some of them, it's as simple as, like, at compressor stations and things like that, having wind blockers, so building wind walls, wrapping and insulation. I mean, we're not talking about a ton. It's again, it's basic maintenance, and then the ability to make sure that they keep electricity so that they can keep flowing so that the water doesn't freeze. And then 2, it's basic measures so that the available technology can move the water and keep everything from freezing up.
Okay. I forgot the question I was going to ask you. I had something. Well, just to review. I guess this was a comment I was going to make rather than a question I was going to ask. Is the Railroad Commission largely been just a window dressing? Is it? Do you think it's just been rubber stamping for the oil and gas industry? Is that what it's been?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be like Wall Street electing the SEC.
Gotcha. Okay.
And if we called it the Banana Commission or something completely unrelated to the Securities and Exchange Commission, because then at least if the general public's electing them, they know what they're electing them for. Right?
And you want them to change the name.
I think they should change the name.
That was, the first time I guess I'd been in Texas roughly since about 1997. And when I heard someone was running for the Railroad Commission, I'm like, what is going on with the railroads? Why is there a railroad commissioner? Is there that many railroads in Texas? I said, I haven't seen that much, but I guess it needs a commissioner. But that's what I learned. And I was probably 30 years old or more. And I had been here for 13 years and never knew that. So, it's a tough thing in Texas. And I guess this is the line you walk, is that so many people's livelihoods are, through the oil and gas business. There's an enormous amount of people who careers in this business. I don't know the exact number, but I would venture to guess.
About 350,000 people in the state of Texas are employed in the oil and gas industry.
350,000. So, which I guess brings me to something a little slightly bent off the topic that I would, see what your opinion on it is. We're kind of leading towards, not nearly as fast as a pace as someone would like to believe, but we're leading towards somewhat of a decarbonization of the world. My fear is that Texas does not have a plan for that, especially West Texas. And I would sit here wondering, what is Midland doing? What is the Permian doing to prepare for all of these people as it, that not just a decarbonization, but also the drilling has become automated. They're looking for ways constantly to remove humans from the equation because humans are more expensive than robots.
Yeah, well, and humans make mistakes, right? Like humans get hungover,
they're more expensive. And so they're trying to move them out. So I'm just wondering, is there any purview in the Texas Railroad Commission that is outside of just carbon, or is it like, in other words, as things move forward, there's going to be more, different types of alternative energies. They're in Texas as well. We see the windmills.
Yeah, 20%.
Do you guys do you regulate that as well?
So the Railroad Commission does not regulate wind or solar.
Okay.
I think that they should.
Okay.
I think you need a comprehensive energy commission that regulates all exploration and production of energy. Yeah. And Texas is really exciting because you're right. I mean, if you go out on I-20 and near Penwell, there's 1,600 acres of solar. And we've got windmills. And regardless of what you think about those, and
they have a place.
Right, they have a place. Now, I think personally we should rethink our grid, and we should really look at demand and consumption, and we should maybe all of us have a couple panels on our house and a little turbine on our fence. And right, you lose a lot of this because you can't store it. You lose it in transmission, et cetera. But in my view, it's here regardless, right? Yeah. We cannot stop it. And we have done a really bad job all these years of being like, this is ridiculous. No, never going to happen. I'm like, guys, it's happening.
It's happening.
So we need to take control of it, and we need to help guide that with a long-term plan, not someone who's got a 2, 4, 6-year political agenda.
See, that's the problem.
Right, and that's why I'm running, because I don't give a shit about. I hate politics. I've always voted in Republican primaries. I identify as a libertarian-leaning Republican, but I think. So that was this opportunity. I was like, the only way we're going to fix this is from within. And I've had this mafia analogy lately of like, let's keep it in the family, because most of us are doing the right thing, or trying to do the right thing. But if you've got bad actors, then you can't compete, because if there's different standards for different people, that's not fair. Excuse me. And so, yes, I think we absolutely need to have a comprehensive commission. We need to get intellectually honest on decommissioning obligations across the board: windmills, solar panels, oil and gas. The fact that the most expensive bond in the state of Texas is $250,000, and that we have $2.3 billion worth of orphaned wells that we need to deal with, obviously this is a problem. Half of the Railroad Commission's budget of about $100 million goes to plugging orphaned wells. In what world are you given a job? Your one job is to make sure oil and gas operators do what they're supposed to do, which includes plugging out wells when they're done using them. They don't do it. So instead of fussing at the regulators and firing the boss who's in charge of supervising, they say, oh, well, you didn't do a good job supervising, so instead we're just going to give you the money. You go hire the people and do it yourself. It is insane. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting different results.
I'm sorry. Something you said earlier, I think, I've seen this in not just, this situation, but I think the point you were making is if the industry doesn't fix itself and the government comes in, the federal government comes in, that's going to be much worse.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's like a
AOC,
self-imposed. Right? You see universities do that when they get caught cheating. They self-impose their own, because they know if the NCAA comes in and do it, it's going to be so much worse. And if the federal government comes in, especially if it happens during a time of a more left-leaning, government. If the Democrats control the House and Senate, it's going to be so much worse on Texas if they don't do it themselves. So, I really, that's a really good point, and I like that point. Have you your career has been in surrounding the energy industry. Do you fear any type of blowback from this in any kind of way?
You know,
You're challenging a lot of people.
I am. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I worry, but at the end of the day, I know that I'm doing the right thing. I know I have a lot of supporters that know I'm doing the right thing. And no, I don't. I feel like this is kind of part of my mission, and I have the right training, the right skills, and you believe in God or the universe or whatever it is. I couldn't sleep at night and look at myself in the mirror in the morning if I wasn't doing something about this, because I know how bad it is. And I have the unique skill set and position, and I've done well in life, and I'm able to take that risk. And so I feel morally compelled to do this.
Well, a couple of things that came up when reading about you, and the one was the qualifications, and I did want you to explain why you were for this job, but the reason I didn't want to ask you is I didn't want to, because I believe you've been asked condescendingly, and I didn't want to be doing that.
No,
And I think
never.
That's such bullshit. So I didn't want to ask you condescendingly, but I think if anyone listened to this interview here will undoubtedly know you are very, very well versed in this business, in this industry, the machinations of it. You seem to be almost an unbelievable engineer level, knowledge of the oil and gas industry. You were talking about things I have never even heard of, which is not extremely hard to do, but more importantly, I got an authenticity of what you believe here out of what you're doing, and as someone who is, my business is safety and health, and what you're almost exclusively talking about safety and health, and I didn't know that before we spoke. It would be that much of an important thing. I didn't realize the situation was where it was. So I really love your passion about it, and it's good to see in person. So so that was nice to see, and I hope anyone that listens to this episode takes a look at your message, takes a look at your concerns, and takes them seriously. And they have to March 1st to vote, right?
Yep. So anybody but Wayne. And look,
Okay.
I have nothing bad to say about my challengers, right?
Yeah.
Tom Slocum and Dwayne Tipton are good guys. They're both industry guys. And I firmly believe that if any of us gets in there, we will do a much better job than the current.
Yeah.
And look, regardless of what happens, my next mission is I'm going to get Christy Craddock out of there in 2 years, and I'm going to get Tom Craddock out of the House.
She's the longest serving one, isn't she?
She is.
Okay.
And you know what her qualifications are?
Go ahead.
She graduated law school. She got hired by Daddy's lobbying friends. Daddy gave her $500,000 to run her first campaign. He was a mud sales guy in charge of the Natural Resources Committee, which drafts the legislation that regulates oil and gas. So ask yourself, how does a family that came from very simple, humble beginnings make hundreds of millions of dollars regulating an industry?
Yeah. That's the Nancy Pelosi effect, isn't it? Going in as worth $250,000 and 30 years later worth $150 million.
Yep.
Never doing anything but working for the government. So, Well, thank you very much. How can everyone find out more about your campaign, information on your issues?
Yeah, so my campaign website is Sarah, SARAH, the number 4, RRC.com. I am very accessible. I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on...
You've had a few advertising segments.
I'm on TikTok, the Unicorn Lawyer. But yeah, I'm easy to find.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time for us, and I wish you the best of luck. And if you get in there, I hope you accomplish all the hefty goals, because it looks like we're counting on you.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and accept the mission. Please subscribe to the Mission Zero podcast on your preferred streaming service, and be sure to give us a 5-star review.